Hi everyone, welcome to Animation Club's an inside look at the animation industry. Now, just as a brief little intro, today we're going to go over a couple different pipelines, the 2D television pipeline, the 3D film pipeline, and obviously there are so many more like permutations of animation than this, but just for the sake of like educational purposes, we're gonna go over these and hope that they like cover as much ground as possible while also being cohesive. And we're gonna follow that up with talks about what the Animation Guild is, talking about the union, and this new thing that you might have heard of called the New Deal. Now, big disclaimers all around, these are generalizations and simplifications made for educational purposes, and by no means is our talk today representative of every production. It's just supposed to be a jumping off point for everybody to try to learn more about the industry. Now, first of all, I'll hand it off to Phoebe.
Hi guys, so I'm going to be going over the 2D TV pipeline. Again, this is going to be really simplified. So first, how does it start? How does the idea come to reality? So you might be familiar with the idea how movies start with scripts, but shows kind of start out as pitch bibles. And a pitch bible is a collection of art and concepts to give the studio that potentially would take on this project an idea of what the story is about. Usually pitch bibles are compiled together by a single artist, an experienced animator who will pitch their idea to the studios. And usually studios tend to accept pitches from people they have worked with or are familiar with their work, like other animators and writers from previous shows, just because they know that that person has an idea of what actually goes into making a show and has like the experience for that, because whoever pitches it and creates the pitch bible is going to be the showrunner. So here are some examples of work that might be included in a pitch bible. So this is some stuff from like the early Owl House concept art, and you can see the characters and like the little like bits of summary and writing are similar to what the actual show looks like, but not like quite the same. And this kind of gives you an idea like what's communicated is across is like the bare bones of the concept, generally what the story is about, the vibe. And this is some stuff from concept art and pitch bible samples from Avatar: The Last Airbender, and again you can see like a lot of the vibe of the story is coming across, what the characters sort of look like, although not quite what the actual show ends up looking like. And again, these sketches are usually done by like other artists or like the showrunner who's pitching it, to just get an idea. And these things can be changed along the way. It just gives the studio an idea of what it's gonna look like. So if the pitch gets approved and it's greenlit, the production for the show begins, like the actual making of it. There's generally two types of show productions for 2D TV animation. That's script-driven and board-driven. We'll go into that difference. So script-driven shows are essentially, they're run by the script. So the writers and the directors will create what's called a locked script, where they all write it together and then they finalize it and they're like, no more changes after this point, and then they hand it to the artists. So the writers kind of take care of like the story and the dialogue and the character arcs and the plot lines, and then the artists take care of like actually making the show come to life. So some examples of script-driven shows are Avatar, Owl House, She-Ra. Those are ones where the writers and directors finalize things before the artists got their hands on it. So the next is board-driven shows. In board-driven shows, a general outline for a specific episode will be given to the storyboard artists, who then write the script as they storyboard scenes. So some examples of these shows are Steven Universe, Adventure Time, Phineas and Ferb. So like the story of what happens will be in what's in like the written material. So it's like character A goes to the circus and they meet character B and they set it on fire and then they go home. Like that would be an example. And then the storyboard artists kind of draw out shot by shot, scene by scene what happens, and then come up with a dialogue as they go along as well. So here's a list of some roles of people who are involved in this pipeline. So there's showrunners, directors, writers. There's a whole bunch of different artists, and we'll get into what each role does as we go on. But generally, this is the kind of jobs that are in the production, in the pre-production aspect of making a 2D TV show. So here's kind of like a simplified pipeline of what this kind of looks like. You have the showrunner, who's the head of everything, kind of in charge of like the look and the story, and their vision goes to like the directors, who are in charge of like different episodes. After the directors kind of get an idea of what the story happens in the episode, that gets handed off to the storyboard artist, who determine like what each shot looks like. The revisionists kind of clean up what the storyboard artists decide. The animatic editors take those shots, time them together to music and dialogue, and then it goes to become animation. We'll get into more detail for those later. The showrunner also kind of communicates the concept of the look of the story to the visual development artists, and then what the visual development artists, I guess, what vision they draw out, like in their concept art, gets taken to the artists, like the background painters and the designers and the color stylists. So, to get more into the nitty-gritty, the showrunner is the one who pitched the show and is in charge of the project. So their job is to really clarify the vision and the look of the show. So they're really involved in the writing and directing process, and usually have been like a writer or director or a board artist in the past, so they kind of know what's going on. The showrunner doesn't necessarily own it. The studio technically owns like the actual show. They're just in charge of the vision and communicating that vision to everybody on the team. The directors work under the showrunners, and they're assigned to oversee specific episodes. So because multiple episodes in a 2D TV show are made at a time, they take a long time to make, so you can't just make them one after the other. Since the showrunner can't be in charge of every episode, directors are assigned to specific episodes, and they go over the script, art, and boards of the show to make sure it all aligns with the showrunner's vision. The writers are in charge of making the script for the show, and they map out the character arcs and plot lines. This has some overlap with the director and showrunner positions. In board-driven shows, this responsibility overlaps with the board artist, and in script-driven shows, this might overlap with the directors. Writers are sometimes given character sheets to kind of make sure the writing is consistent from episode to episode. So visual development artists, that's what VizDev is short for, come up with like the look and design and the colors that kind of serve the story well. So if you've seen stuff that's labeled concept art, that is what visual development artists do. They basically hear what the story's about, and then they make a whole bunch of really cool drawings that incorporate like the mood and the look and the feel of the story. So this is done really way in advance. It's like the first artist that gets to work on the project is coming up with what these characters look like, what this world looks like. After that come the character designers. So after the visual development artists will solidify a look and the feel of the story, these artists finalize the details of the designs for specific characters. So that's really going into the specifics of what color is their cloak, how many gloves do they have, stuff like that. And they're in charge of creating character turnarounds, which as you can see in the images here, that one's from the Dragon Prince, the one on the top and the one below is from Voltron. You can see that they draw the character several times from different angles. These will be reference sheets for the animators so that when they draw the character over and over in the frame-by-frame animation, they can remember all the specific details, like, oh, where does this armor go? How big are the shoulder pads? Stuff like that. And it's really important to have these character turnarounds to keep the look of the character consistent in each episode. Next are prop designers, who do the same thing, but instead of for characters, they do it for props. So you can see some of these here, some examples, making sure you have the details of these props close up, and these and showing this single prop from multiple angles. Again, this is also based on the look and the feel that the VizDev artists have provided, and they also create reference sheets for the animators. Color stylist is another type of artist in the production pipeline, who are basically in charge of deciding what colors go for the characters for each scene. So how are we going to color this character for each scene? In each scene, you have a different kind of lighting depending on the time of day, the environment that the character is in. So you actually have to change the colors that you're using to kind of like shade the characters for each individual scene, which is a lot of work. And so this goes for not just the characters, but also the props and the effects. And you have to really kind of tell and imagine what kind of lighting will also affect the mood of the story, and how that can look like it's still the same characters but just lit in a different way. In the 3D animation, you would just change like the actual lighting, but because this is 2D animation, everything is like cell shaded. You have to like figure that out yourself and then pick the colors. So you basically have to create a different color palette for each scene. Next are the background designers and painters. So these create the backgrounds of the scenes based, again, on what the VizDev artists have provided. And these backgrounds aren't really usually animated. They're kind of these paintings that stand behind like the actual character animation. So these are usually just still images that are very carefully and with extreme detail painted over by these artists. Next is storyboard artists. So they're given the script or story for an episode, and then they draw out each shot and each scene. So really what a storyboard artist does is mapping out where the camera angles are, where the characters stand, how they move from shot to shot to shot in the actual episode. Notice that these drawings aren't extremely detailed. They don't look like an actual line art drawing. Simplicity and clarity is important, so they'll usually draw in a shorthand style which communicates the general shape of the characters rather than like every single detail about them. Storyboard artists then pitch these boards to the directors. The revisionists come after the storyboard artists and kind of polish up any mistakes or make any corrections or suggestions. This is a lot about making sure the characters are still on model, which means that their proportions are all correct, especially in relation to other characters. And then the animatic editors take these storyboards and then time them to the music and the voice acting, really frame by frame, to make sure that the animators know exactly what they're supposed to do. The animators, after that, are the ones who take on the project. Most 2D TV shows are animated overseas by other studios, so the storyboards are sent overseas to these studios, and then they send them back for the showrunner and directors to review. And now I'm going to pass it on to Sophia, who's going to talk about what the pipeline looks like for a 3D feature film.
Hi, so in general, the 3D pipeline has a lot of similarities, so we're going to see a lot of overlaps in terms of like what the people with their individual jobs do, but I am going to be highlighting some of the differences. And one of the most important things to keep in mind is that the timeline for a feature film is very different. In TV, you're expected to write up episodes on a weekly basis, ship them off overseas so that they can get animated and released on a schedule. Whereas in film, you are more so building up to one final product, which means that there's more space for iteration. The process is less like maybe streamlined, and because it's often not shipped off over to like another animation studio, there is more of an emphasis on the animation production. Now, director is, unlike with TV, it's probably more like what you imagine when you say director. They're the captain of the ship, they visualize the story, they give it direction, they gather up. Well, they don't have to, but I think the best directors usually gather up a team that they trust in order to convey their vision. The writers probably write the screenplay. And fun fact about this, a script is just generally like the outline, but when you're talking about film or television, it's called a screenplay. So visual development, also called like, I don't know, production design, concept art, these differences largely aren't super consequential. It kind of varies by who you're working for, but in general, the visual development team, they design the look of the film and they're headed by often art directors or production designers. In addition to designing the world, they have to have a technical mastery of color, lighting, texture. It really serves as a blueprint for everybody else. Some of my favorite visual development work is the one on the bottom right here for Spider-Verse, specifically anything done by Alberto Miyago. For character design, it's what you expect. They design characters. The process can kind of bounce back and forth a bit in the timeline. Like, they might make an initial character design based off of the script, or like even an initial concept or blurb, and this looser design gets given to storyboard artists. Then maybe like once the character gets finalized and fleshed out a bit more, it might like be given back to the character designers to really like polish and finalize. Prop and environment designers, very also similar to their TV counterparts, at least in like the function of their job. As with character designers, they may have more back and forth, and often they have to design more props or say like change an environment as the story is solidified. Personally, my favorite designs are from movies that are set in really specific worlds. Like this example here is from Zootopia, or also like San Francisco from Big Hero 6. Story artists. Again, they're pretty similar to 2D TV in that they draw out every shot and they're trying to convey the story. In a 3D feature, you tend to have more movement and flexibility with the camera, so the story artists also have to like act as cinematographers. The cinematography aspect also exists in television, but just you're more limited, I feel like, in a 2D sense, because you have certain backgrounds that you have to stick to, so you're not necessarily able to play with the extent of what the camera can do. Editors. These guys edit together the storyboards with the voice dialogue, the sound effects, the music, and they stitch it all together into an animatic, and they have a lot of control over the pacing, so that's a huge part of their job. This isn't part of our slideshow because it's not really an artist job, but shout out to the voice actors. Also shout out to like the whole production team, I guess. But back on track, we're going to talk about layout artists next. Now, there's a lot of subcategories here, but generally they stage and block out the scene based on the animatics. If you've ever seen previs art, that's what this can slide into. They use simple models and rough sets to like roughly see what the film will look like. For example, this shot here is taken from a previous shot of Despicable Me 2. When you're looking at an image, like a storyboard image, you want to frame the thing in a certain way, but once you're actually working with like a more physical camera, you're gonna have to end up staging things differently in order to like convey similar story beats, in order to like choreograph camera movement, things like that. And there's like depending on your production, you may have like different teams of layout artists that get more and more detailed. And fun thing about layout artists is that they're not even restricted to animated films. A lot of the Marvel movies like heavily use layout artist teams in order to plan out their action sequences. The modelers, they digitally sculpt everything that has been designed into the 3D space. Oh, this is a really fun example that I like to draw from. It's from Paranorman, which was made by Leica. And Leica's typically known as a stop motion production company, but the stop motion that they create is based off of 3D printed models. So everything that they make is designed in like a computer beforehand. So they get to play with like really cool stuff. So that there are 3D modelers at Leica. Next, riggers. If you've ever had to rig something, my condolences. But their job is super important because they create a skeleton for the models. And actually, no, the skeleton is the easiest part. The difficult part is making them clean and movable for the animators. You can see a couple of the rigs here. One of them is just Miles's eye, and that's insane. But the whole point is that you're trying to make these things easier for people later along in the pipeline. The texture artists create textures and materials for the characters, props, and environments, making them feel like tangible and accurate. That doesn't necessarily mean photorealistic. It means like whatever the look of your film is going for, you have to nail that. Usually you're following what was designed by your vis dev artist, so therefore it's important for your vis dev artist not to just be like, ooh, I think this would like look pretty to make a castle like this. It's like important to be like, no, the material should look like this. It should reflect light like this. Character animators. This one's kind of difficult to show with a screenshot, but obviously they animate the character. You bring them to life with like an acting performance that's based on what emotions are appropriate for that scene and the artist's own knowledge of like weight, timing, and anatomy. If you've ever seen like a behind the scenes kind of DVD featurette where everybody's hair kind of looks like really matte and everybody looks like they're made out of plastic and all their clothes keep clipping through their like bodies, but all the emphasis is on like the movement, that's them. That's all character animators. They have to really sell that this is like a living, breathing, usually human. FX animators. Big special shout out to Jamie Klein, who we invited to talk a little bit about this. This is a lot of non-character animations that includes hair, fire, water, cloth, sand, explosions. So much cool like simulation stuff. One thing that might like fall into this, potentially, might be like crowd simulations, which I find kind of ironic because it's like, oh, it's people, but it's not character animation. Lighting artists. This is a step where the scene is digitally lit, and in my opinion, I think it's really when you like breathe it to life for it to go from like a work in progress to be like, oh, this is a film we're working on. So lighting artists have to keep in mind color, mood, time, weather, etc. There have been so many innovations with like ray tracing in the lighting world. Similarly to some of the jobs that we've mentioned before, they should try to be matching the viz dev work or like the color keys. Compositors. Another shout out to an alum, Claudia. Unfortunately, I don't think like any of her work that I saw on her portfolio could be like screenshot to show exactly what she does, but she was a compositor on the movie Klaus. Just want to verbally say that. You create the final image from these different passes. Basically, you're working with like, if you know more generally the concept of layers, you're basically compiling those layers in order to make the final product. For example, on the bottom left here, you can kind of see what it looks like maybe from like an unrealistic bird's eye point of view to see like compiling layers. This is specifically from Studio Chromosphere, who had a hand in animating parts of the Steven Universe movie, which, you know, marriage of TV and film, we love to see it. And next, we're going to have Caroline talk a bit about the Animation Guild.
Hello. So if you were at our meeting where we were going to present this, you may have already heard some of this presentation before, but I'll give an overview again, just if you want to have a recording of it or if you weren't there. So the Animation Guild and sort of what we're talking about that is like just another look. So we looked at a lot of the roles in the pipeline, but there's also some other things that go into like behind the scenes stuff of animation. And one of those is like the conditions and how people sort of address issues. And one of those ways is through unions, and specifically the major animation unions, which is the Animation Guild. So going a little bit over like what are unions? They're organizations that negotiate with employers and businesses on behalf of the union members. This means that it's basically a third party that can go in and work as a collective and be sort of a collective voice to bring forward concerns or sort of new things they'd like to implement or standards for people who are in a specific workforce or like working in a certain job. Probably have more of a stronger position to be in the rooms where decisions are being made, because individual animators aren't always there when those major decisions are being made, and so it's nice to have that perspective potentially, or I guess in any job. And there's sort of one major union the IATSE, which sort of is like a broader category, which a lot of like sub like unions are within. So it's a little bit like, you may be sort of familiar with unions in the entertainment industry. The way I sort of know it through is like hearing, like, if you're in acting, having your like SAG card, which is Screen Actors Guild, and it's like special. It's like a card that means you're part of the union, and it like influences like your pay and stuff, or the sort of productions you're on. But historically, unions haven't really taken as big of a hold within the animation industry. There are a lot of reasons. This is like a brief overview of what that is. Like, just sort of looking at some potential things, but very much like sort of a surface look, just sort of pointing some potential things out. So one, it's a small industry. For one reason, you might not want to sort of rock the boat and potentially get labeled as someone who's not good to work with. On the other hand, it's also a very tight-knit industry, which might mean you don't really feel like you need an outside presence to come in and sort of communicate needs. You might feel like that's something that can all happen within house. Another thing is there's a lot of freelance work, so you're never sort of at a place long enough to really organize. You know, there's a lot of turnover in workers just by the nature of how people are hired and sort of the nature of how projects are. And so, you know, you just don't really have time to sort of be like, hey, like, I wish these things were different, because you're at all these different studios and you're getting all these like different work environments. And then there's also a fear of increased cost. Sort of how we talked a little bit about with like 2D, how a lot of it's done overseas now for the animation process. That's because it's a cheaper process. So people are afraid that if sort of, you know, like wages increase, that might potentially like lead to like less jobs at certain studios or certain areas that have unions. However, higher wages are definitely beneficial for a workforce. I mean, like, beneficial for the individual, but also it creates a more stable workforce. It means people are more willing to stick around, perhaps stick around a studio, and then pass on their knowledge and their expertise. And sort of when it becomes a standard, it's sort of, there's the potential for everything to adjust, and that just becomes the sort of new standard wage. And the more people that adopt it, the more typical it is. And also having that as standard might make it easier for smaller studios with less of a budget. If they're getting hired on for a project, they can more easily negotiate a higher sort of like contract to pay their workers a better wage, because it's already industry standard. So sort of some things, but we do have one major animation union in the United States, the Animation Guild. It's located in California. Makes a lot of sense. That's where a lot of the entertainment like industry is for animation, and just in general. And they sort of negotiate on behalf of the animators there. I think Disney is covered within that union, and they are with some other big studios. And you can also check out their website. There's a lot of super great resources there, such as something that shows you different wages and different rates. So like if you have a specific job, like we learned about all these jobs, you can go through it and look at sort of the different like pays, like the average of those and like a collection of those. You can also look at it, I know they have it, I don't think it's in the screenshot, but they show it for like studios, so you can compare it between studios. That's a really good way to like negotiate your wage, to like see where you're at, to like get a good understanding of what like good reasonable pay is for the industry. And then some other really cool resources, things to help you basically from people who you might not know a ton about like your rights as a worker, but like these people, that's their job, and the union is like, that's what they're all about. So they're the ones doing all that research and looking into that and helping you like understand that. So you can be knowledgeable and like have a say in your work. So what is the new deal for animation? We wanted to bring this up just because it's been a big thing in the animation news. You might have seen it online. But it's basically the contract that the Animation Guild has with the Alliance of Motion Pictures, which is the major sort of collection of studios, was set to expire. So they have a contract, I think right now it's every 3 years, and you basically renew it, and it's a good time to check in, be like, are our standards where we want them to be? Do we need to readjust that in any way? And so it was last ratified in 2018. It's had to wait. Basically, it was supposed to happen in July, but because there was the parent union was doing its own negotiations, we had to wait for that. And so that deadline continues to be extended for when they need a new negotiation. And what they're trying to get with this new contract is, through the New Deal, there are some major things that they want to accomplish and some major changes they want made to this new contract. One is a wage increase. The people, there's a feeling that, you know, cost of living has increased, but wages have not. So that I think that would be very beneficial. Also, other things related to wages, such as the one major issue is that with contracts, sometimes you're hired on for one season or a show that's said to only be one season, but it's then broken down into multiple seasons when it's released. And typically you might, if you're on for multiple seasons and as you like work on multiple seasons, you'll get a pay raise for each season. However, that doesn't happen if you're only signing a contract for one, so people feel like that's unfair. And then also another main thing that's happened between 2018 and 2022 is that we have had a major increase in streaming as like a platform and like as a way for people to get entertainment. And so, you know, typically like streaming contracts, if you're working on a show that was going to streaming and being on these streaming platforms, it was a bit more risky, and so you might not have as substantial of a contract. However, now many animators believe that like it's a pretty sure bet if the show is going on to streaming, and so those contracts should be the same as for like television, and should be held with like the same weight and sort of similar contracts. All right, and so kind of at the end of this, we just wanted to give the petition for in support of the New Deal. We learned a ton about like all these different roles, and that's super cool to hear about, and it's also really interesting to learn about, but it's also interesting to think about the type of conditions that all these people are working in and what those environments are like, because it's really important to think about like working in animation, that there's not only jobs there and thinking about the jobs, but thinking about making sure that people are able to have a career within the industry, and that they feel like if you put in the work, if you put in the effort and you like have these jobs and you're able to afford to live, able to like afford to like take care of your family and like feel like you have a positive place that you go and work every day. And things like the New Deal are ways for animators to ensure they have that within the jobs they have, because sometimes, you know, people who are making the decisions for a business, they have a bunch of different people they have to think about, a bunch of different stakeholders, and where they're thinking about the people of increasing for people who like for stockholders and increasing sort of that profits, and thinking about like maybe a short-term strategy which really thinks about like short-term high profits, which within that strategy you're okay with a labor force that is turning over a lot because, you know, you're trying to get high output, sort of with harsher conditions that might work for the business strategy, but that's not working for the people who are making the animation. And so when we think about all the cool things that we love within animation, we want to think about like giving like respect and like sort of noticing animation and like holding it in like high regard. Like we can get that through awards and like stuff like that within shows, but we also get that through making sure like there are fair labor practices and like really respecting and listening to the people who work within the industry. And so we also wanted to bring this to your attention. So if you're interested in signing the petition, feel free, but thank you so much for like listening to our talk. We're really happy to share it with you. And yeah, have a good day.